Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever the world you're joining us from here today. I'm Marc Spiegler, Global Director of Art Basel. Thank you for joining us in the middle of our online viewing rooms week, the second one that we've done this year. As you know, we've been doing weekly conversations for the last few months, but this week we have a different type of conversation and we have many more of them. And this is the first of several conversations where we will be going into specific sectors. I'm very delighted to have with us today two of the experts for the statement sector, Prateek Raja and Jasmin Tsou. If you could say hi, guys. So they have kindly agreed to give us a tour through statements, the sector that has been dedicated to young artists, emerging artists, and their galleries for more than 20 years. This is a place where many of the great names of today, got their start or were first recognized internationally. A couple of housekeeping points, or a couple of factual points. In the online viewing rooms, when you access them, you may see more than one artist because we decided to give the galleries the option not only of showing the artist who was selected for statements, but also adding other artists from their program. Unfortunately, this year, the Balois Art Prize, which has been given for 20 years to to one or two statements artists, was unable to take place because they couldn't judge, the jury couldn't tour the sector physically. Of course, that will come back next June. Jasmin and Prateek are going to walk us through the rooms. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A function, so you can pose questions to them, and they'll intermittently take questions about the various galleries and our projects. Before I shuffle off stage and let them, take the baton and run with it, let me give them both an introduction. Jasmin is in her first year as an expert for the Art Basel Committee. She's joining us from New York. At 27 years old, she opened her first gallery on the Lower East Side, a very distinctive space prior to her next equally distinctive space. She opened it in 2012. Today, the gallery has 17 artists, 11 of whom got their first solo show in New York with her. So she's really been someone who's done a lot of the sort of A&R work within the industry, and is someone who is great at spotting artists young and pushing them forwards. Prateek joins us from Kolkata, along with his wife Priyanka, who's his partner as well and co-conspirator with the gallery. They launched Experimenter in 2009 in Kolkata. Prateek and I have a long history. I remember meeting him at Art Dubai many, many years ago, and saying, "You should apply to Art Basel. You're fully ready." I saw the depth and the conceptual rigor of their program. And then a few years ago, he not only did he start coming into the fair, but of course he joined our experts a couple of years ago. It's really Experimenter is as much an educational institution as it is a gallery. There's a lot of they have things like the Experimenter Curators Hub. It's in a country that doesn't have the kind of depth of art world that New York does, for example. He's really pulling together everybody who's part of the scene and having the conversations that need to happen. They'll take it from here. So Prateek, Jasmin, run with this. And to the audience, you couldn't be in better hands. I'm going to walk off stage and leave you with them, but I'll stick around to watch it as well. Thank you to both of you. Take it away.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you very much for that introduction and the wonderful introduction. Thank you for being with us, everybody. And we're very happy to welcome you to this wonderful talk today. Hopefully, we will be able to cover a lot of ground. There's a lot of exciting projects in statements. Before I start off, I want to say that statements is one of the most exciting parts of the fair, and we are always excited to see and invigorated to see how new and exciting programs break ground in statements. They bring the most ambitious, most exciting projects to the fair. They add a certain edge to the fair that makes the fair really stand out in many different ways. Statements is a very dynamic sector. Every year it has a new identity in the sense that there's a new bunch of galleries that come in, and we hope to be very rigorous in the way we approach this sector to kind of develop a conversation with a certain rigor in mind. I want to say at this time that out of the 18 statement booths that are in the digital space and in the physical space, if the fair would have happened, 12 of those, like 60% of those galleries are new. They're first time at Basel, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are here in Basel in this digital form this year for the first time. We're very, very pleased to have got to have your presentations, and thank you for coming. I will speak about a few of the booths, a few of the presentations, and my colleague Jasmin speak about a lot more as well. Before we begin, I want to say that all of you who are watching and looking at the digital OVR, please do go into the details of it. What we're going to cover in just the skin of what we can possibly talk about. The dealers are waiting for you to answer your questions. If you have any questions, or if you have anything you want to know more about the artists, please to write to them. They'll be only happy to write back. If we can have the first slide up, we can go with it. The first presentation here at the OVR at statements that I'm going to talk about is from Bank, which is a first-time gallery at Basel. And it's good to have you here. The exhibition is focused on brutality and the ideas of the idea of how the three artists presentation originally. So I also want to take a step back to say that statements this year is a bit different. It has been it is usually a solo space, but this year the fair has been very active and excited to allow other artists to be participating in the solo, so up to 2 more artists. So there's a little bit of a change this year, but it allows these young galleries to really focus their program into something very serious and exciting. So the first presentation by Bank is kind of focuses on ideas of brutality and disease and pain and belligerence and anger. And all the artists in this exhibition, the 3 artists, Patty Chang, Chen Qianzhou, and Jin Shan. Please excuse my pronunciation of the names, because it's possible that I will mispronounce some of the names. All 3 artists in their works use the bodies as their main focus to talk about the innate human compulsion to affect change with their most intimate and immediate catalysts, their bodies. On your screen is a work by Chen Tianzhou, an amazing body of films that the galleries put up. Personally, I think the OVRs are very suited to digital film-based work, so you please view the video. The work here is Exo Performance Baby Chin Yao and Exo Performance Bayo. These are 2 people. Baby Chin Yao and Bayo are 2 collaborators that Chen Xianzhou has worked with in the past. And Chen's work deals with the state of constant struggle and constraints of existing order, and the kind of limitations of the human body and the flesh, and also constantly talks about use of religious rituals and animal shamanistic practices, as well as the use of like drugs and trance and high commercialization and consumption. So the videos are really about that kind of a heavy high computer generated figures. The characters in this video are made by computer generated graphics, and they're people who are adapting using sounds and characters from traditional Chinese or East Asian rituals. There's a particular work that I would also like you to see in this body of work is a film called Trance, which is a 8-channel film. This is a 3-channel one. Trance. In Trance, the artist commissioned or worked with many important performance artists, artists performing on stage to create this hyper space of trance and beats and movements, and it's really a beautiful presentation. In addition to, they're showing early body works of Patty Chang and sculptures by Jin Shan. So please go and look at the OVR in their section. Move to the next slide.
Okay, this one's mine. So we're very excited to welcome Bodega. This is their first year at Basel. And I wanted to focus on a work by Dina Yago. Dina Yago is a New York-based artist who is a part of a larger collective referred to or known as K-Hole. K-Hole is a bit of a forecasting company that would actually, usually forecasting companies that would be hired by larger corporations to help them forecast future products or any number of things they wanted to do research for. This type of forecasting is usually private, but K-Hole does a really interesting project where they make their forecasts public. They've done 5, and I don't believe they're making any more right now, at least. But it's a very interesting collective because they are artists that have that each have their own interest in understanding new capitalist structures and have actually had their feet inside of the system of capitalism. So stepping to just focus on Dina Yago. This here is a wall work, a mural specifically. And Dina is interested in the language of murals as a sort of educational, or at least in the language of education. The colors you can see are ones that you could take from like a children's coloring book. And it's meant to kind of play with this idea of allegory and how do you communicate to a public about sort of morals and ideas. It's hard to believe that it was this year, but in January 2020, which feels like so long ago now, in America during the Super Bowl, Mr. Peanut sort of famously got killed off in one of his commercials. And it was a very weird, dark attempt for Peanuts to rebrand itself, but it was so oddly timed in so many ways to sort of make some kind of joke about public death. And here Dina sort of prods at Mr. Peanut and how he could revitalize his value. And the way that he does is to infuse himself with cold brew coffee, which is essentially some type of food that was invented purely by branding. I find it absolutely difficult to consume, but it's a sort of kind of humorous but a bit dark way that Mr. Peanut revitalizes, again, his value. Dina's larger practice definitely looks at new capitalist structures and how, as our economies and technologies evolve, how labor evolves. So within that, a good example of that would be the gig worker, somebody who does on-demand labor, such as like an Uber driver or Instacart shopper, and how they're sort of promised a certain type of flexibility, but in exchange, they kind of give away all of their rights in terms of insurance, and unemployment insurance, and all these sorts of things. And Dina's a bit interested also, very interested, I should say, in the labor of the artist and how does the artist's, labor also provide flexibility? Not that that's, of course, the only reason why an artist is an artist, but just that is one of these promises that is made, but in exchange, you don't receive a lot of stability or any kind of benefits. And I think that Dina's work is particularly relevant to the economy that we're seeing now through COVID, and it's been laid bare in the sense that all these gig workers are actually turning into essential workers, and yet there isn't a lot of protection, which is a huge conversation in America, for sure. Okay, so that's Dina. We can go on to the next one. Prateek, do you want to talk about this one? Oh, I think you might be muted, or is it me?
All right. Okay, yes, it's me. And it's really a pleasure to talk about the next presentation, Bureau from New York. a colleague on the selection committee with me a year ago, and a wonderful presentation that Gabrielle has put together through the work of Diane Severin-Nguyen. Diane is an artist born in 1990 in California, lives in New York. She's Vietnamese American. And the image that you see on your screen is one of her photographs that is a really exceptional capturing of this kind of moment, which is relevant across Diane's works, including the video that is being screened at certain times by Bureau on the online OBR. The film is called Tyrant Star. But coming back to the photographs, the complex imagery of the photograph, as you see in front of you, is achieved by staging materials in her studio, and then kind of focusing on how the materials transform with different agents. It's kind of this, speaks of this kind of fleshy, rapturous wounds and kind of moments that she creates for the camera. In Diane's own words, these are constructions that are kind of delicate and incredibly tenuous, and the camera kind of intervenes just moments before their capture. So Diane's work is very sensitive and very nuanced. It captures a certain kind of a fragile moment. There's the video Tyrant Star, which I mentioned just a while ago. These beautiful photographs kind of complement that video in a way, because it also talks about this kind of fragile moment that is beautifully captured by the video. The video is the film. The video is in three parts. I mean, it's the Tyrant Star, the reference to the star, Diane, which transmutes from symbol to icon to flesh to authoritarian star to a pop star. So, and to kind of the bodies which suffer the star as well. So that's how the direction of the video moves. In the first part, we see no humans, but a physical presence in a close-up detail of a kind of a lush, degraded landscape. And there's text in the video. The text is taken from Vietnamese folk poetry, and the dramatized voices in the video kind of talk about this reminiscence, this kind of star-crossed history, telling of a story of a broken love, of songs of reunification, and accepts these kind of traumas. In the second chapter, there's a teenager girl who appears in her bedroom, singing the kind of a synth pop version of Simon and Garfunkel's song "Sound of Silence." It's a protest song from the 1960s. Of course, it's referencing the Vietnam War, and she projects her own image through the webcam, and then there's a kind of sense of isolation that kind of sets into the picture. In the final sequence, we see this kind of urban space, this kind of orphanage kind of space, where the camera kind of focuses into the arms and legs of these faceless children, and you suddenly realize that you find yourself in this kind of awkward, uncomfortable moment where the film has actually moved you from being a very soft love conversation between two people to kind of led you into this space where there's big convulsions and which re-emphasize the artist's attention to the bodily and the material inheritance of violence. So it's a beautiful film. I would encourage you to watch it, and the photographs are absolutely gorgeous. This is just one example. Please go in and see the other photographs. Next slide, please.
Okay, so Rafa Esparza, I highly suggest if you go to Commonwealth and Council's section and you click on this image, Rafa made a video in his studio of this work and this body of work, and it's absolutely beautiful the way that he talks about the work. This is just a line from the gallery that Rafa Esparza's paintings rendered on Adobe, the building material made of sun-dried earth used by indigenous peoples of the Americas for millennia, center brown subjects confronting fraught histories of colonial violence and white supremacy. There's a lot of ways that both the gallery and the artist articulate the work that I find incredibly beautiful. But to take a moment to step back, Rafa has worked with Adobe throughout his work and performance, and also in these paintings. It's essentially a craft, right? That consists of taking living matter and soil and water and mixing it together to a type of surface or a type of material that becomes, so you take something like land, which sort of conceptually to the artist feels like, especially if you refer to indigenous peoples, it's something that has a bit of difficulty in having a grasp of or ownership, and then it kind of, through Rafa's use of it, becomes something that's very solid and stable, and something that he's able to build these portraits on. It's also a craft that he learned from his father, and from what I understand, they had an estranged relationship, or maybe parts of it were, and this was a way to sort of unify their relationship and come together through this material. So there's so many poetic ways in which he's using this material and very authentic approach to it. The portrait itself is a reference to a type of portraiture in Los Angeles. So Rafa was born in Los Angeles in 1981, called star shots. So, images that would be taken before everybody had cameras, to sort of portraiture, studio portraiture that could be given away to family and friends. And Rafa feels this portraiture is, filled with love and joy, and just a very tender and intimate way of sharing images within a community. And he also is thinking a lot about the type of violence that was happening in LA in the 90s. Of course, the one that's probably most known is Rodney King, but there's many different ways in which violence was being perpetrated on Black and brown bodies, especially the youth in LA in that time. In this video, he mentions how Hillary Clinton was referring to Black and brown youth as super predators, or just the way that the school to prison pipeline was really, perfected in the 90s. And so he's trying to, I think, through this work, beautifully capturing this really beautiful, I just find this work so incredible in terms of the love and the pride I find in this character in particular. I'm very, very happy to have him in this section. We can go on to the next one. Jonathan Linden Chase, an interesting, something that happened, I kind of found out through our research and preparing for this viewing room that I didn't really realize during selections, is that there's actually a couple of artists that refer to their grandmothers a lot throughout their practice. And Jonathan Linden Chase is one of them. Jonathan's work here, I chose this one because I found it so incredibly beautiful, but there are other ones in this booth that are depictions of cowboys, and Jonathan's grandmother was interested in cowboys, obsessed with cowboys, and as a sort of way to mourn her or think of her, to grieve, he revisits the cowboy motif a lot in his work. But to take a step back, Jonathan Linden Chase is, if any of you went to Miami, the Miami edition of Art Basel in 2018, the Rebels had a selection of their work on view in their recent acquisitions. And of course, they show with Company Gallery and have had a solo show there. A lot of what he's dealing with is the way in which the Black body is navigating, the Black queer body is navigating. There's a lot of, I think that one way to think about it is, well, actually, it's probably best described in the press release for his show in 2018, where there's the word storm is used for the kind of composition that you find these Black figures in. I think that storm is such a nice way of describing, it's not quite chaos, but it's kind of just this space that these Black bodies are navigating, and the way in which they, are trying to reclaim their own sort of representation within these spaces. The figures themselves are not necessarily particular people, but are instead, perhaps done from memory or done from just sort of imagining of figures in space. And I think that there is this idea, again, that press release in 2018 was written by Tiana Nakia McCladden, and there's reference to cruising that they make within the press release, that I think is really beautiful. This idea of how do you recognize somebody as gay, or just in terms of their sexuality in a certain space, and how do you navigate that space? And I find that this work is very much about it. Formally, it's also super gorgeous. Highly suggest checking out more of the work there. And I think particular to, oh yeah, just to say last thing is, I think that hand in hand with all of that, there is this kind of exploration in the way of masculinity is being challenged and overturned. Sorry, you can go on. So Jesse, oh, and that was also company's first time in Basel, and also Donahue's first time, not only in Switzerland, but in the Basel Fair at all. So this is so exciting to have her. This is a work by Jessie Reeves. An interesting thing about Jessie Reeves' work is she's very good at walking this line of what the language of design and the language of art. And I think that perhaps there's a lot of ways that those two worlds overlap, but I think that within the language itself, it doesn't overlap very often. So in this piece, what you're seeing is, in all of Jessie's work, you can actually use it. It's intended to be used, and you would be able to sit on this chair should it be acquired. And you're seeing an actual chair sort of repurposed and lying sideways. You're also seeing this technique of mixing sawdust in with glue, which is traditionally used by craft to patch a very small hole. But what I love about, and Jessie's mastered this for sure in a lot of her work, what I love is she's kind of almost using it in this kind of exaggerated way to kind of give that sawdust glue compound a bit of its own personality, to kind of give a bit of a gesture to this furniture object itself. Another way that she does this with some of her other work is it's a little bit like she kind of cracks open the furniture object and looks at what's inside. So you have this kind of refined object on the outside, then you crack it open, and what you see on the inside is perhaps foam, or maybe decaying foam, maybe raw wood, maybe bits of metal that, if this object is like a mid-century object, maybe parts have broken up and no longer in use. And she finds ways to kind of reincorporate kind of these interiors of objects into the object as a whole. And yeah, Jessie Reeves' work, beautiful, gorgeous. I think these are bowls, perhaps, that are used inside of the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Jasmin, there's a question from someone which says, are the Jessie Reeves works meant to be functional by any means?
Yes, they are intended to be functional, from what I understand. I'm not sure if every single one of them are, but they are intended to be functional. Okay, this is Evgeny. I'm gonna mispronounce the last name, and Tufiev, who's showing with Emmeline. Evgeny, very interestingly, is also part of another kind of theme that I've realized more through our research and preparing for this, that there's a lot of artists that are pointing to local folklore in their regions. And so Evgeny is, he was born in the Republic of Tuva, which is in southern Siberia. So the part of Russia, Siberia, where it's really close to Asia. And so in this region, a lot of shaman and Buddhist cultures are still thriving. And he points a lot to these mythic folklores and makes his own versions based on that. What you're looking at is actually his method is he starts with beeswax. And so that's why it kind of looks like it's a sort of soft material. He's sort of sculpting it with beeswax, and then he goes through a process to turn that into bronze. So they're kind of bronze sculptures, and I believe the galleries would be able to tell you more about this. Emmeline would be able to tell you more about this, but there's the way that he casts it that kind of helps get that patina, which I think is very interesting. And he's recently started working with a foundry that makes, I believe, like airplane parts. And so their attention to detail is super incredible. There's actually, I don't know if you can access it later, but we did a studio visit with him. Basel did a studio visit with him and Margot Norton, and it was incredible. He has an amazing collection of collections, and he collected in childhood a lot of skulls from animals and things like this, and he has a very wondrous approach to materials. And Emmeline actually talks about its program as being interested in artists that have a very diverse use of materials, and that is the same for Evgeny. He does textiles, ceramics, all different things. So within this work, he's, in this particular one, he's clearly made like some sort of mask that's on top of, 3 masks on top of a mask. A lot of things that he returns to are the knife, mask, bowl, vase, the idea of a monster, and a mirror. And to him, these are images that he would have seen a lot in the folklore of Tuva, and he believes that these are elements that are in all myths around the world. It's kind of interesting because I do see how some of these overlap with other cultures in terms of folklore, but there also does seem to be, of course, regional specific folklore, and that's what I think he's definitely pointing to. He also has this deep interest in sort of what the fake, this kind of what is fake and what is real. And so he's clearly remaking some of these images that are kind of his own imagination, amalgamations of existing artifacts. And to him, I think that my understanding is that they are as important as the actual artifact, in the sense that he's kind of recontextualizing them in this art context.
Jasmin, there's a question. Someone's asking whether the Evgeny sculptures can be installed outdoors. I'm not sure if you're in a session, maybe you should ask the gallery directly.
Oh yeah, they're very small. They're like kind of meant to be set on a table is my imagination, but yeah, definitely ask them. For sure. Okay, this is for you, Prateek.
Thanks, Jasmin. That was wonderful. So
thank you.
I'm very excited to bring you guys to Grey Noise, which is a very exciting gallery from Dubai, who I've known personally as a program for many years now. And they're presenting a solo by Shreyas Karle. Shreyas is based in Bombay. And in addition to his art practice, which is quite conceptual and beautiful and nuanced and sensitive, he also has a printmaking studio, and he does a lot of work with other artists as well, and an artist-run space called Kona Space. It's a nice space for solid artistic work, and Shreyas is quite unique. Shreyas and his wife Himali are both artists, and they're quite unique in that sense. Shreyas stays on the outskirts, not the outskirts, the edge, outside edges of the city. Bombay is an ever expanding city, and it's constantly growing. And the work that Shreyas is presenting here is called is a solo called Domestic Objects. It's looking at how domesticity and usability can be dissolved by learning towards a form than function of objects that come at home. There's a certain sense of play in the sculptures. They're mostly a sculptural-based project, but Shreyas also does a lot of interesting mixed media work as well. The sculptures have a certain amount of play and in the arrangement into the atmosphere, and the act is ritualized in terms of the play becomes the function itself. So this work that you see on your screen, it's called Fingerprints, and it's really a work that is it's a fingerprint drawing. It's a work that you install on the wall. It's a spherical bezeled glass mirror, and as you install the work, naturally when you install the work, there are fingerprints on the mirror. And the artist wants that to be the work, the fingerprint to be the work. So what he's trying to say is, by removing or dissolving the functional value of the mirror, instead adapting it to its form, the artwork forms from itself. There's an interesting idea where in this exhibition as well, Shreyas and Himali have a young daughter who is constantly part of the home, and the objects she collects and the way she arranges her things become part of this this project, his work as well. So for example, there's in the OVR, there's a beautiful terrazzo tile which is embedded with clips and nails and gold trinket. It's really a kind of a textural or a gestural rather thinking of the project in a very beautiful way. It makes us also think about the idea of the home and the idea of domesticity and being indoors and locked in this time of the COVID of the pandemic. And it's interesting that we chose this project in October last year, and it's a moment now the artist looks inwards and the work of the house, the home, the domesticity becomes a point of a conversation as well. There's another beautiful work where two folded blankets are kept opposite each other, talking about a conversation or a kind of a gestural relationship between two points of view. To reach out, but of grain. They're also doing a conversation on 24th sometime, so please keep an eye on that. Back to you, Jasmin. Sorry.
Cool. So here we are with Matt Cobson at High Art, and again, this is an interesting reference to not exactly folklore, but sort of medieval folklore, essentially. A kind of Matt Cobson's work in general kind of uses examples of ancient philosophy and medieval folklore to reintroduce some of those narratives in a contemporary setting. And basically what he's kind of interested in is this particular character. I think of it as the fox. I think this is the fox that he constantly uses. And the fox in folklore is sort of the one that's kind of the sly fox, the kind of one that stands in for the one that's sort of poking at things, stealing things. And it's the most common animal to be seen in these type of beast epic types of narratives. And what he's sort of interested in is taking some of these animals that in those narratives would not typically have their own voice or their own personality, and sort of giving them a voice and a personality. High Art decided to actually do a combination of Matt Cobson's work and Dina Yago's, and I think that's such a good combination because they both sort of are using, particularly in this one, the language of sort of childlike storytelling to get at, I don't know if Matt would use this word allegory, but I know that Dina does. And this particular video I found super beautiful. Usually Matt is better known for the laser work, where it's sort of a laser-like image on a wall. And I found something kind of interesting in reading about what he's discussed about this work is that he's kind of more interested in the image or the moving image or the way that the image repeats through this laser projection than he would be in an installation. And if I'm understanding him correctly, I feel like the reason why he's doing it is he finds that like the imagination is a little bit stronger when you can kind of watch a moving image than perhaps an installation itself, which I think points to how much about his works are about narrative. So a lot of the text, for example, maybe not in this image, you can't see it, but there's usually a text that, so this animal's kind of talking in a voice you can't really understand. It's sort of like the Donnie Darko bunny where he's kind of like, and then he says, next time around, I'll make a difference. And then you can kind of see I highly suggest you watch it. But the animals themselves are kind of in a bit of a state of predicament. And they're very philosophical in the way that they talk about their situation. And of course, he's being roasted over a pit here. And yeah, I think he also reuses a lot of the characters throughout all of his different films. And he talks about kind of how they have this kind of sort of fan fiction-y kind of relationship to each other. Yeah. I think that's Matt. Okay, Prateek.
Yes, it's back to me. Isla Flotante. This is a new gallery for the new gallery in the sense it's come to Basel for the first time. It was established in 2012. Isla Flotante is based in Buenos Aires, and it's very exciting for us to see a gallery from Argentina to be really pushing the young artists in the way the Isla Flotante does. Isla Flotante was established in 2012 as an artist space. And then, as I said, it's showing in Basel for the first time. It grew to become a center for the art community and showing young artists in the Buenos Aires art scene. So it really grew from an artist-run space to kind of being representative of the artist scene in the city. They're showing 3 artists in the statement section. Andres Pereira Paz, with whom the original application was made, and then they've added two more artists, Mariela Scafati and Ana Prata. The work that the image of what you see on top is of the work by Andres Pereira Paz, and it's referencing something called a project which is called Radio Carabuco, and the project is based thematically on this idea of reinterpreting these paintings and looking at many different aspects of gender and other related things. I can talk to you about them now. So originally a painting was commissioned in 1664 for the artist Joseph Lopez del Rios to paint the four last things for his church, for Joseph de Arellano's church in the town of Carabuco, and in which is now Bolivia, in Titicana lakes. This monumental paintings of the Purgatory or the Last Judgment and Heaven and Hell were part of the Roman Catholic Church's mission in South America to evangelize the indigenous population, and priests like Arellano traveled deep into the hospital regions to prove the depth of their faith. So basically also extending the church's colonial power. Now the work in question is called Girl Angel with Poncho. Now through this work, Girl Angel with Poncho 2, Andres Pereira Paz tributes the Calamarca angels, 10 paintings that were preserved in the Church of Calamarca, a town close to his home in La Paz in Bolivia. Dating back to the 17th and 18th century, this painting, the Calamarca angels, are portrayed as androgynous, celestial, aristocratic, and at the same time military beings, all at once, like these superhuman but nymph, like transgender military beings. Their unknown origins add to the opacity of what they present, and the lack of authorship obviously raises the question as to who was behind these paintings. But what the artist is trying to do is trying to recapture these paintings through this kind of assemblage of sculptures using the materials. They can be these characters in the paintings can be seen as armed women or even bird women figures holding the contradiction in their own presence. And human bird figures were quite popular in pre-Columbian representation. As Jasmin was saying some time ago, how many artists are using their indigenous and folk traditions and digging back, introspecting back into their own cultures is very much part of the conversation that we're having, especially in the statesman sector this year. This exhibition also provides a kind of a localized geopolitical point of view, and also comments on the decolonization process in Latin America and the complexities that are associated with the decolonization process. There are beautiful photographs as part of the exhibition. There are also the other two artists I mentioned whose works are in the exhibition. Please do visit the Isla Flotante OBR. I think you'll have a good time going through them.
And we have a question actually from Michela Antoinette. Are curators interested in making space for deeply spiritual art and visionary art in the fine art world? I think this is a really interesting question, one I cannot answer, but I think it's a very interesting question. And this is a little bit of a personal note, but the Hilma af Klint show is something that I've been thinking about a lot because it was a huge dive into spirituality. And I think it's just interesting, like, how a curator would go about picking even what works of Hilma's to show, how to show them. I think that's probably the best example in New York of a spiritual show. And I'm very interested in seeing how that changes throughout, the various movements that we're going through right now in terms of political and economic. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Prateek.
I mean,
interesting. We'll see, because a lot of artists are really interested in it in a very sincere way.
Yeah, it is true.
this is my gallery, JTT, and I'm showing Elaine Cameron Weir. We kind of opted to keep this pretty simple with the presentation, so you can't see the details of these images, but if you go to my, from my page on the OVR, you can zoom in and see what those discs are. On the left, you see a depiction of the Last Supper, and on the right, it's a depiction of praying hands. Elaine has used these exact molds before, not in terms of, sorry, not these exact molds, but these types of molds, which what they are is they're spinning molds to make jewelry. And so you would sort of inject metal into one end of it and it would spin, and then it would go out into all, in a sort of centrifugal manner, go out into these little branches where you could break them off and there'd be like little bits of jewels. And this is a way to, there's a couple of reasons why you make molds and spin. Part of it is to keep the mold from getting too hot. Some people do it to make a hollow object so you can rotate it. But Elaine is more interested in the mold itself. So she made a mold of the mold. And essentially what Elaine is interested in is sort of the visual aesthetics of function, the aesthetics of structure and of systems. She had a show with us in September that dealt a lot with, or in her larger practice, she's used a lot of military equipment. And there is a certain aesthetic to that. And you can kind of see the purpose of an object through its aesthetic. But she's also kind of interested in where that overlap of military growth is both a necessary, not military, but scientific growth is a necessary step for humanity, but it overlaps with a military interest, and where that kind of growth and curiosity in humanity eventually tips over into something else, or where that sort of slippage is. In these particular works, she's using symmetry. They're two different pieces, but she's kind of made them as sort of sisters or paired. And in our show in September, she had 6 artworks and there were 3 pairs. This one uses a sort of concrete textile that is used in construction. You get it wet and you can kind of mold it, and it's very, very heavy duty. But of course here, Elaine's using it in a bit of a Baroque manner. Once it's set, it's set. So this concrete is set in place into the laboratory lattice that is attached to. And that is what that metal structure is. It's a sort of a lattice meant for holding beakers. And the glass inside is a type of glass de la guerre, which is sort of used, maybe some of you know, in France, where you would kind of break the glass and then take the chunks of it and sort of reassemble it. Yeah, so again, Elaine is she's not a religious person. She didn't grow up with religion. I think if anything, she's looking at it with sincerity, but sort of interested in its aesthetics and how the aesthetics are pretty similar to something like science fiction, and kind of just trying to unpack it a little bit. We can go on to the next one. Prateek, you have Lambda, 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 right?
Yes, I do. So this is one of our most exciting galleries this year. So this is Lambda, Lambda, Lambda from Pristina in Kosovo. The first really international scale gallery operation, and we're very proud to have this amazing presentation by Ena Pindell in the OVR this year. And we wish we could have seen this in person, but I guess there is going to be a future for this beautiful body of work. So we'll see it in future again, I'm sure, very soon. So Lambda, Lambda, Lambda was founded by Isabella Ritter and Katarina Schendl in Pristina in Kosovo. They are the only gallery to be working in this kind of a space in the country. The gallery provides a platform for contemporary art in the region, not only in Kosovo, but also around the region, larger Balkans, including Bosnia, Serbia, amongst others. Lambda, Lambda, Lambda also provides artists and the audience an intimate, informal environment that is conducive to experimentation, discussion, and learning. So I'm all of us in the statements and speeches selection committee are excited to have you here. So welcome. I'm going to talk about Ena Miletic's work. Ena is born in 1982 in Zagreb, in Hungary, and It's a beautiful project. The project is called Materials and Incompatibles. Hannah is trying to reflect on issues of representation and social reproduction by making linkages between photography and weaving, and both aspects of looking at objects from different points of view. What the artist does in these sculptures, I would call them sculptures. They're beautiful sculptures made out of wool and textile. Is that she photographs, documents these makeshift repairs that people do on the streets, and of maybe broken mirrors of cars or side door handles, and people usually tape them or make some kind of makeshift construction to hold them together so that they don't fall apart. Now, Hannah takes the photograph of these makeshift constructions, somehow keeping together that moment of fragility together, and then sculpts them in these hand-woven processes in a way which requires kind of considerable time and dedication, and is really kind of a comment on the economic overproduction and sanitization of objects that we see in our current situation. She, of course, is reminding the viewers or people who are interacting with her of the presence of the artist's hand and the movement of the artist's hand, and also about the hand processes. How she approaches the medium is a metaphorical act. She weaves these gestures of care and repair, and kind of rebuilding something that is valued, and she kind of deals with ideas of neglect and loss in this beautiful poetic way by using these materials. They're very delicate and they're very beautiful. It's also in a way paying homage to the textile industry of her native Yugoslavia, which following the civil war and ethnic conflicts in the 1990s, this booming industry was nationalized and then subsequently dismantled and privatized. And so it's kind of a way of looking at weaving, looking at textile, and looking at local construction, kind of adapting local construction. So it's really a project that you should really look into. There are beautiful works up there to take a look. Next.
Okay, so this is Lars Friedrich. Again, this is their first time at the fair. Very excited about that. And they're showing a couple of artists, and we are focusing on Minh Yoon. Minh Yoon, I have a little bit of a personal connection with, because I was introduced to the work through Anna Sophie Berger, who's an artist that went to school in Vienna, was born in Vienna, and Minh Yoon went to the same school. And in this school, the Applied Arts in Vienna, it's an interesting school because they bring in fashion as an element, not only in sort of a conceptual, not only in a practical way, but in a conceptual way. And I think that you see this here in Minh Yoon's work. This is a leaf that is constructed of leather that's hand sewn together. And it's a highly conceptual work, thinking about sort of the use and purpose of fashion, and also sort of thinking of the everyday. Of course, he's sort of pointing to the fragility and the practicality of this work, which would be installed on the floor. So when you're walking in a space with this object, you'd have to kind of be somewhat more aware of your body, be sure not to step on it. But at the same time, it's quite durable as a leather object in a sense, as leather is particularly durable. We are kind of running tight on time, so we're kind of gonna power through a little bit here, and we apologize for that. So we're gonna go on to the next one. Liu Yufei, I'm so sorry about the pronunciation, Liu Yafu. Liu Yafu is showing with Magician Space. They're influenced by pop culture and an interest in sort of re-dramatizing some existing popular images. In this particular work, which I actually just noticed, I think they might have taken this work down, so I'm glad to have a chance to show it to you, but there are other pieces and there are ways to look at the video. So this is a video. In this particular work, he imagines, he sort of creates a fiction where Fassbinder chose two Chinese actors to remake a plot from Blue Velvet. And it's quite funny. There's a little bit of humor in the work, but there's also this really beautiful poetic these poetic moments where he's sort of zooming in on this apartment or domestic space. And there's so many little things hidden in all of the compositions. And there's even sort of a fictional interview in this where the Fassbinder and the artist in the film, or Fassbinder is talking about why he wanted to work with Chinese artists. And it's, in Fassbinder, the sort of fictional Fassbinder says, by controlling the actors in virtual painting, I hope to reference Michelangelo Antonini and Uli Sig's experiences to analyze their passion for China and its relationship to the with idealistic dreams. So I think there's kind of a bit of an awareness in the way in which Western culture in particular approaches art in China and etc. and vice versa. Okay, we're going to keep going. Diamond Stingray. So this is a really, really interesting work. I wanted to really highlight this one. Here you see images of Black Jesus, and it's a lenticular photograph. So if you were to bend it and rotate it like this, which on the OVR you can see it do, you can also see Diamond's school ID. And I wanted to kind of take a moment and just reference where the image of Black Jesus first emerges in America, at least significantly. A few months before the Detroit riots in 1967, Albert B. Cleage, a Black nationalist Christian minister, installed a shrine of the Black Madonna Church, a massive 18-foot high painting of Black Madonna and a child. Soon afterwards, the riots, which claimed 45 lives and injured more than 1,000, a group of African Americans blackened the statue of a Jesus in Detroit's Sacred Heart Seminary. And sort of what was happening at that moment was there was a huge divide, of course, between Martin Luther King's sort of peaceful movements and Malcolm X's movements. And Albert B. Cleage was sort of in between, but slightly aligned a little bit more with Malcolm X, and felt that spirituality was a really important thing to come around during the civil rights movement. And so he sort of starts to discuss the idea of Jesus as a Black man. And so this is a Diamond. That's just my own research into the beginnings of this, because I found it interesting. That's not something that Diamond necessarily points to. I think she's more talks about her own personal narrative. And so this is another artist that actually points a lot to her grandmother. And these are images that were in her grandmother's house. And there's this kind of idea of this way that Jesus is sort of gazing out to kind of be a little bit uplifting and sort of say, like, in terms of the tribulations that a Black individual might go through in America, you have this source, you have this rock for empowerment, and it's going to be okay. And it's kind of the same sort of promise that college gives, which is, you know, it's okay to go into debt. You're going to get a job once you get out of college. And Diamond, I think, does this beautiful sort of very open-ended combination of that kind of understanding of debt. And debt in America, you know, is such a wide and vast problem, but I think that Diamond is really pointing to the kind of feeling of the lure of the justification for why you would be put into a situation to need something like that, to need something like education, or just the lure to different kinds of values and things like that. This is a really incredible work, and a shame we can't see it in person, because I think it would be really beautiful. Cameron Claiborne, I think, is an incredibly interesting artist, incredibly interesting, and I would position him, I think that I'm so excited we have Ena Pindell in the feature section, because I think that there's a combination between the sort of repetitive gestures of this work. Actually, there's 2 slides for Cameron. We can look at the next one as well, which is a sculpture. And this is, again, another artist who was inspired by his grandmother's domestic space. This brown gesture that you see here is taken from his grandmother's ceiling. It's a type of ceiling technique called popcorn ceiling. And inside of his grandmother's ceiling, there was actually glitter embedded into it. And he talks about what it was like to kind of have to move around the ceiling in order to kind of see the glitter. But to take a step back, Cameron's work is very much about space, architecture, and what it means for a body to enter into a space and feel safe or not feel safe. And the drawings that he made during COVID and in quarantine sort of deal with kind of the body, the subjectivity of the Black body, and it's sort of its ruptures, its interiors. I find it so incredibly beautiful. With this particular one, this sculpture, if you were able to walk around it, you'd be able to see a sort of pink insulation on the inside of it. So again, it's kind of this reference to sort of the Black body and its relationship to architecture. I highly suggest you take a look at some of the drawings. If you can zoom in on them, they're so beautiful, they're super rich. This is Simone's first time at the fair, so if you haven't introduced yourself to Simone, I highly suggest that. She has an incredible program. She's also showing Basira's work, and I highly suggest you check it out. Okay, Edith Carlson, another artist who is referencing sort of folklore, actually. Within this work particular, she's referencing kind of this historic archetype within folklore of this kind of evil mom monster. And in this one, she's kind of reversing it of sort of the horrors of what it's like to be a mother. So what you're seeing are casts of women's bodies, but also sort of animal-like structures put in and embedded into it. There are a few details of this work that I think are really, really beautiful and gorgeous. And Edith was born in Estonia and still lives in Estonia. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. And yeah, she's referencing sort of classic some myths of that area. I'm so sorry to be going so quick. I don't think we have much time. Okay, and I'm also not going to say this name right, but Yuaria Tushia. I found this work was so incredible. There's a sort of humor in Yuaria's work in general, and she also makes these kinds of installations where she sort of makes a whole room and environment all out of ceramic objects. I kind of, in my mind, likened her a little bit to Sally Saul, where there's a little bit of humor used in the objects, but also that humor is a little bit of a way to kind of talk about something that maybe would be uncomfortable otherwise. So there's a lot of sexuality in her work. In this particular one, I love how the bowl, and actually this is sort of mentioned in a bit of press about her, how the bowl kind of acts as sort of a barrier. So if you kind of are looking at it on a table, you might not really know what's going on inside until you sort of peer in. And they actually have videos of these where you can rotate the bowl and you can sort of see this like sexual orgy essentially happening. How are we doing? How are we doing on time?
It's all right. I think we're all right.
How did we plow through? Okay.
All right. Let's look at these questions.
I think we're kind of finished for everything now. That was our sort of speed round, and we're just kind of gonna have Marc come back and join us, or are we gonna? We're figuring this out as we go. Here you go.
Back. Hi, everybody. I mean, first of all, let me say that was fantastic. You know, I was off camera texting friends, telling them to join if they wanted it. I mean, the luxury, the privilege of having people who really thought hard about these projects and chose them from among hundreds of options, you know, literally hundreds of options for inclusion, and, you know, really dug into each of these artists is something that's unparalleled. And so I think, you know, those of us who were able to watch were privileged. And I think I'll be telling everyone who didn't get a chance to watch it afterwards. Yeah, there are a bunch of questions during the run of during your walkthrough. I think one question that was really interesting, and I'm happy to take it from an Art Basel perspective, is, you know, statements is for emerging artists, and we've defined that in many different ways. But I'm curious, when you think of an emerging artist, and by definition, almost the galleries that showed them, how do you think of that? You know, because there's so many different ways to define it. Or more specifically, maybe what makes someone not an emerging artist anymore? You know, is it more a no longer thing?
Yeah, I think it's
Jasmin? Yeah.
I think it's a complex question, because on the one hand, especially when we're on the committee role, which is a part of the factor thinking about what an emerging artist is. I think Cameron Claiborne is a really exciting character for an emerging artist, because he's somebody that I think has a ton of promise, and maybe people on an international level don't know about the work yet. And I would say that that's a really interesting example. I also think that somebody like Jesse Reeves is a sort of another interesting, Jesse's had quite a bit of institutional support. But I think that in today's market or industry, there's a big jump between emerging and mid-career. And it's very important for us to support artists through that bridge, because sometimes people tend to think, oh, they've had a lot of institutional support, they don't need any more support. And so Jessie Reeves is a good example of somebody who I think could even be almost a mid-career artist who's had so many institutional, so much institutional support. But it's just good to kind of make sure that there is support for artists in that, that area.
I know Prateek is going to say something more philosophic and intelligent than I am, so I'm going to give a little bit of market context. I think it's when we talk about not only the emerging artists who are in these sections, but also the types of galleries that are in these sections. I think one of the real values to what we do at Art Basel and what our colleagues do at other shows by setting up these sectors for younger galleries with emerging artists is that we also allow these galleries to play on the stage before those artists might be sucked up by other galleries. In essence, if you don't let artists, who've had a few institutional shows, which by the way are granted much more quickly than they used to be before, then they also tend to get drawn into a market dynamic that pulls them up into galleries who didn't do the work. I'm sure Prateek, I don't know the numbers, but I know for Jasmin that 2/3 of your artists had their first New York solo show with you, so it's important and valuable that they're able to stay with you. And the fact that we were able to host JTT many times in our younger sectors meant that, of course, those artists felt like you were someone with whom they could grow. And if you deny that opportunity, because someone is, too established, then I think you actually deny the opportunity also to the galleries that have made that possible in the first place.
Absolutely.
Prateek, say something more intelligent and philosophic, but I wanted to put that out there from my position as the role of the fair.
So this opportunity to see such a wide range of applications at statements makes you really think about what is emerging. Over every year, when I've been doing the selections now for 3 or 4 years, and every year we have this kind of a broad understanding of where the people's minds are, the young artists' minds are. It's incredible to see this range actually coming through. And Marc, you would have noticed that over many years that you see a kind of underlying undercurrent that comes in every set of applications. But also the thing is, the emerging artist is also a dynamic aspect. An emerging artist is also someone who has different opportunities in different contexts. So an emerging artist in a European context or an American context is different from an emerging artist in an Asian context or a South American context, primarily because one has to look at it from the lens that the opportunities they get. Therefore, there's a lot more discoveries to be made across the globe, and Art Basel's fair, which is really a global fair in all its in every aspect of what it should be, and Statements really has that spread to be able to absorb this incredible list of artists from all over the world, and truly what is an emerging artist is defined by this sector very beautifully. So yeah.
I mean, I would say for the collectors who are watching this, that you can, it's always difficult to choose between all the emerging artists whose names you see flashing across the radar, but I think you can in very good faith assume that the artists who have been chosen for Statements, by Prateek, by Jasmin, by their colleague Jennifer Chert, and then, in discussion with the 6, even more established gallerists who are part of the main committee, represent among the best emerging artists, and coming from galleries who also specialize in growing these kinds of talents, and so I think in a sense, there's no certainty in buying younger artists ever. There's no certainty in buying art, but I think you can rest assured that a lot of thought has been put into who is in these booths. We're way over time, but I have to say it was really worth watching it. I learned a lot, and I think I'm gonna give Jasmin the last shot if she wants. But I will say that I think what's great about this as much as it might have felt rushed to you, because of course these are all artists about whom you could do an hour-long lecture, is that we see a lot of these names flashing across, as hashtags or handles on Instagram or other things. But I think, it's not the same as being in the booth and talking to the gallerists, but still, to have a 2 or 3 minute in-depth discussion, which puts these artists in context and why we chose them among thousands of their peers, is really valuable. So thank you to Prateek. Thank you for Jasmin. Jasmin, do you want to close this out? Anything, any final thoughts?
Just to kind of second what you just said, I definitely encourage you guys to talk to the galleries. I mean, I'm obviously more aware of, New York-based artists or galleries, and I would really encourage you actually to reach out to the galleries that we didn't give as much time to, or ones that have really specific references to specific cultures, as the dealers are going to be the best at talking about those cultures. So that's all. But yeah.
Great. Prateek, Jasmin, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who stuck around and watched this whole show. There'll be another one on Feature tomorrow night in 22 hours. Well, tomorrow night my time, or tomorrow afternoon my time. Anyway, we hope you can join. I'm sure it'll be just as interesting as today. But I think this is a fantastic kickoff to this new format. So on that note, good night, good evening from Zurich. Thank you, Prateek. Thank you, Jasmin. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.